Faiz, Shakir, thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Can you summarize your report for our audiences, Fear Incorporated? What has your research revealed?
Sure. The Islamophobia has become a serious problem in the United States of America. You've had a small network of people producing propaganda that has been delivered to the masses, which is trying to convince the American public that there should be a fear of Muslim presence in America. This small network produces reports that say there's a creeping Sharia threat that is going to overtake American laws, that the construction of mosques are incubators for terrorism and should be stopped, that President Obama is a secret Muslim. These kinds of theories have originated from a small number of people, and what we identify in this report are the names of those individuals and how they are getting funded.
In the report, you name these 5 particular individuals and sources of funding and sources of how the message gets out. This sounds like a conspiracy. Are you saying that there's a conspiracy? There's
no conspiracy here. All the stuff that's in the report has been public. These individuals operate publicly. David Yerushalmi, Robert Spencer, Frank Gaffney, Daniel Pipe, Stephen Emerson, the 5 individuals who we list as the nervous center of Islamophobia, have been putting out propaganda for years about Muslims, all on the record. You can search Google and find it. And also these funders that we document, the $42 million that goes to these 5 individuals. Those $42 million come from IRS reports here, all publicly available government documents that we just followed the connections, followed the money trail, documented how this operates based on public information.
There's a different element in an additional element in your report as well. That is that of the role of politicians. You name them as well. What are the politicians doing?
Sure, these politicians serve to mainstream the hate. These small network of operators in the Islamophobia network would not have much influence if they didn't have powerful players helping them along the way. They have powerful players in the media, and they have powerful players in politics. Alan West, a congressman from Florida, Michelle Bachmann, who's now a presidential candidate from Minnesota, are amongst the leaders who have a grand stage and frequently mouth anti-Muslim rhetoric, such as there's a creeping Sharia threat, and we need to be aware of Muslims who don't harbor American values.
You studied a 10-year period, in essence, as well. How effective has this group been? Can you quantify it?
Very effective. You look at poll numbers in America, and Muslims are amongst the least favored group of all ethnicities, religions. They are viewed very unfavorably, and they're actually viewed more unfavorably now than shortly after 9/11. And I think that there's a reason for that. Shortly after 9/11, President Bush spoke to the United States of America and said, "We are not at war with Islam. Islam is a religion of peace." He went to a mosque. He shook hands with Muslims. He communicated this to the conservative base, that this isn't about targeting Muslims. I think that was the right message. But now if you look at the Republican Party leadership, first of all, there's a vacuum. There's no real leader. Second of all, it's been taken over by these fringe actors who are trying to engender a campaign of hate, sometimes because they profit from it, and sometimes because they just have an ideological opposition to the presence of Muslims in America. But they are controlling too much of the dialogue, and I think in order to stop it, you need to see some leadership from the Republican Party telling them that this is crazy.
On the question of effectiveness, the Pew Research Center released a research this week that stated that there was no rise in alienation amongst American Muslims. They had reported that 79% of American Muslims were happy living in their own community. Does that say that this group might be less effective or not as effective?
Well, I think it shows how crazy they are. If you look at Muslims, as the poll suggests, they're happy to be Americans. They do not harbor un-American values. They aren't looking to subvert the Constitution. They're very happy with the situation they have. But if you do look at some other numbers in that poll, they indicate that they have experienced hate crimes at their mosques, that they know people who are afraid of going outside. I mean, that they are living as a besieged community in some ways, in a hostile environment. And the poll numbers indicate that we should not feel hostility towards our Muslim neighbors in the United States. These are loyal, hardworking people. But there's a small group of people the Islamophobia network, who want to try to convince all Americans that Muslims specifically should be looked at suspiciously, and that they, if given authority or power, will move America in a direction that is too scary, shouldn't, and too, I think, opposed to the ideology of them. Like, I think for many of them, they are afraid that Muslims would try to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, that Muslims, if given a political voice, would try to end the war in Iraq, end the war in Afghanistan, close Guantanamo Bay. These are kinds of things that the hard right opposes and wants to marginalize.
That poll by Pew also stated that 55% of American Muslims believe that, and approaching the 10th year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, that life is more difficult for them. Can you draw a picture for our viewers what that might mean? How has life been more difficult for them?
Sure. It happens in the most casual of circumstances, when you're walking down the street as a hijabi woman who's shouted at or told that they're not fully American, or in the airports, screeners pulling aside a brown-skinned male while other races and ethnicities walk through. When you go into government offices or buildings, being looked at a little bit more suspiciously, given an extra layer of security credentialing. I mean, those kinds of things build in a suspicious class in America. And you're telling basically all Muslims that if you harbor a Muslim name, if you look Muslim, if you act Muslim, that you're going to be treated very differently than all Americans. And I think that that's the kind of thing we want to avoid, is if you're a law enforcement official in the United States, you should not be harboring specific animus towards this one group of people. And I think if you look at what the Islamophobia network has been doing, it's been trying to convince official levers of power here in the United States that we need to treat Muslims as a specific class of suspect individuals.
In my discussions with various people abroad, I've also noticed that some of them feel that there is a really wide anti-Islamic sentiment across the board in America as well. That's not entirely true either, is it?
No, there's not a wide anti-Muslim sentiment. I think what you see is unemployment is high. There's competition for scarce amount of jobs. There's a concern over the direction of America, generally speaking, the kinds of values that we're going to continue to hold. And given all those factors, I think there's general suspicion of immigration. There's general suspicion of Mexican immigrants. There's suspicion of anybody who might take what's theirs, a job, financial resources. And so there's kind of a ripe environment for the Islamophobia network to exist in, because they propagate fear and they give people a reason to hate if they're depressed about their current situation. And I think that's what we're trying to end with this report. Is if you end Islamophobia, you need to look at how they're getting funded. You stop the funding. You stop giving this a platform. And I think you can probably do a really good job of ending the hate.
You touched upon this a moment ago, actually, but can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of precautions can the administration or officials take to keep this at bay, so to speak? What could they do?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to be clear with the American citizenry that we are not at war with Muslims. We also need to explain to those who are trying to push this hate that they're counterproductive in two ways. One is they're telling the Muslim community, who is our best ally in confronting some of this terrorist threat, that they're not welcome, and I think that that's counterproductive. Secondly, I think we need to tell the mainstream American public that not only are Muslims contributing in our effort to secure America, but that they are fully American and just as American as you are, have the same kinds of jobs, have the same kinds of desires for their children to grow up in a better country than their own. I think that there hasn't been enough of an effort to try to convince non-Muslim Americans that the values and the customs and the beliefs of the immigrant Muslim community isn't all that dissimilar from their own. I think that what the Islamophobia network has done is tried to say that these people are very different, very crazy, very prone to terrorism, when none of that is true.
So, to summarize, what is the goal? You mentioned monetary motivations, perhaps, but what's the goal?
Well, I think there's a number of goals. One is political. They would like to win power. Republicans would like to win more seats. They would like to win the presidency, so they would like to marginalize President Obama. Sometimes smearing him as a Muslim is helpful in that regard. They want to win seats, so they put up anti-Sharia measures in various states to try to get conservative voters to run to the polls and vote for Republicans. So political is one. Financial, as you suggest, is another. Some of these individuals profit from their only salary being to propagate hate. And I think in general there's another third and important one, which is ideological. And that is they just oppose the perspective of many Muslims in America on many core issues, whether it's national security or domestic issues. They and Muslims have differences of opinion. And rather than having a public debate about those differences of opinion, they want to marginalize the Muslim community entirely by casting them in an unfair light and with total conspiracy theories about how they are not fully American. And I think that's really the problem here. You can have public disagreement, but what they're doing is engendering hate and in doing so tearing the fabric of America apart.
Have you drawn any historical comparisons with this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's occurred in many times over American history.
Right.
When the Catholics first arrived in America, people were suspicious of who their loyalties were towards. Was it to the Pope, or would they be loyal to the Constitution? This played out during the John F. Kennedy presidency in the 60s here in America, and he convinced Americans that they shouldn't be afraid of a Catholic president, and that was a good thing for the country. It's also played out with Jewish immigrants, of course. When they arrived, people were suspicious of what kinds of customs they were trying to bring to America, what kind of religion was this, and I think over time they have successfully convinced people. They had a vice presidential candidate, Joe Lieberman, run for major office, many senators, then it now become mainstream. It's happened many times over. Even you see it with smaller groups like the gay rights groups, who have felt a lot of the same hate crimes that the Muslim community has. And of course, African Americans in this country have gone through a struggle of their own. So this is not an unusual circumstance in America. But what I would say is we resolved all those prior questions, and we now look back at them saying that that was idiotic. We should never have been as prejudiced as we were when that was happening with the Japanese Americans during World War II. But I hope that now is the moment that we turn the tide of hate in America, and we'd say, we are being stupid right now, just as we were stupid back then, and let's understand that.
Faiz Shakir, VP at the Center for American Progress and editor of Think Progress. Thank you so much for your time.
Sure, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.